we say it like, oh yeah, every life matters, but then our society often treats the homeless like they're on the bottom of their societal pyramid. But look at my story. I have been saved, and got to know God through a homeless woman that gave me that bird. And so she transformed my life. God used her to transform my life. And look at all the trickle effect that it's been having. God brought it full circle where he saved me through a homeless woman, and my purpose is to help the homeless. Right. So he crafted this beautiful story, right? I think in the US, we really love this beautiful stories, right? It's just like this Hollywood ending. God just created one right there where he says, listen, who you consider to be on the bottom can really save and transform somebody's life. So every life does matter. And even the homeless can transform and save lives.
Do you ever wonder where God is at when life is flipped upside down? I'm Sherry, your host, and I created this podcast so that my guests and I could look at the good God we profess through the lens of pain and suffering. What I have learned both firsthand and through the personal stories of my guests is that the God of the Holy Bible speaks beautiful things in the dark. God invites us to give him our pain because he's the only one who can transform the very thing that was meant to destroy us. Our challenge is to trust him in the process so that we might come to understand who he really is versus who we think he should be. Listen in and discover the countless ways in which we can find God in our pain. Megrelishvili shares her incredible journey from a painful childhood marked by poverty and abuse to finding hope and purpose through faith and community. As a child, Anna faced severe hardships, including hunger and isolation, exasperated by an abusive alcoholic father. And despite these challenges, she experienced a pivotal moment at 12 or 13 when she felt a profound sense of purpose after receiving a word of encouragement from God. She shares that she didn't realize it was God at the time, but this experience stayed with her even to this day with great detail and vividness. And as her story unfolds, you'll see that God was speaking about his plans for her life. Her path to transformation began with a life-changing opportunity to study in the United States as an exchange student, which exposed her to a loving and supportive Christian family whom she missed dearly when the exchange student program was over. She discovered a way to return to the U.S. via a college scholarship, and in her second host family, the father was a Christian pastor. These families modeled the heart of God, and her experiences planted the seeds of faith, even though she initially resisted religious beliefs. It's so like God to always be creating opportunities for us to know him if we choose to engage him. She graduates with a degree in business and immediately jumps into the lucrative career of sales, and she's successful. After building a solid career in sales, complete with the various accolades and achieving all of her personal goals, such as buying a condo in a beautiful high-rise building, having it tailored to her specific taste, driving the fancy car, wearing the beautiful clothes. But Anna still felt unfulfilled and empty despite achieving her American dream. She knew there had to be more to life, and so she begins to question God, to pursue God's heart. And God visits again, and he speaks to her. And she responds to what he says and makes the most of trying to follow what she heard. And in her obedience, she's brought to tears, weeping because of an unexpected gesture from a homeless woman. And in that moment, a spiritual awakening ignited a genuine desire to pursue the heart of God and discover what her purpose in life was supposed to be. As Anna shares her journey, you'll notice the golden thread that God was weaving throughout her life and continues to do so to this day. As Anna pursued God's heart, laid down all the material things she had collected, he has brought her full circle, and she shares that she's never been more joy-filled, more satisfied in all of her life. She now dedicates herself to addressing homelessness through her global ministry, the Christian Professionals Network Worldwide, an initiative that aims to eradicate homelessness by building supportive communities and providing membership to those in need. Let's listen in to discover how God used the very thing, poverty, abuse, the very thing that was supposed to destroy Anna and leave her void of her purpose. But because Anna responded to God, she's discovering what God had written on the pages of her life before even one of them came to be. Anya, I am so grateful that you have a time to be a guest today because I know that you're going to encourage the hearts of those who found their way to this episode and your message. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
There are two things you can always count on in life. This is what I say all the time: life being in a constant form of change, and the God of the Holy Bible never changing. And I say that because you are a living example. In my opinion, you're a living example of how God brings change to a whole new level. Circumstances and pressure from the world around us can force change, but a lot of times that's temporary. When the pressure stops, you go back to your old ways, or at least that's been me. But God, if we let him, uses the very thing that was supposed to destroy us and transforms our pain, and that has a long-term impact on our lives, not to mention the way it filters out into those around us. Let's get into your transformation story and the message of hope that you have for others. But can you give us a glimpse of your childhood? Because I know you have shared with me at 7 years old, hunger became a constant companion for you, to the point that you were hospitalized with tuberculosis due to malnutrition. And as a side note, you shared in your, I think it's your cover profile, that when you were in the hospital, it was the first time you felt safe away from the chaos of your home. So that's revealing on how painful things had become. How did your family find themselves in such a desperate situation?
Yeah, so, you're absolutely right about God and just the transformation, because now looking at my life and where I came from, I just can't believe that I'm here and I would not have been without God. But, to go back to my story, I grew up in Eastern Europe. So my family is from Georgia, the country, in Eastern Europe. But when I was young, my family relocated to live in Russia for just a better job opportunities. But we were this family of immigrants there, and it was a really difficult upbringing just because we really didn't fit in the society and we were kind of isolated. But also, my father was just very abusive alcoholic. So he would go on this just drinking binges and sometimes just leave our family destitute for days at a time. At that point, my mother gave birth to my younger brother when I was almost 7. So she was stay-at-home mom, my entire childhood. My brother was months old and my father would just leave us. And so, we were hungry all the time. And, my mom had to make a choice of sending me at 8 years old to start collecting bottles in the street so that I could take it to a recycling plant and, just get some money. And so I would do that. And, you can imagine just the shame I was feeling, just hoping that I wouldn't run into my classmates, that I'm digging through this garbage cans and picking up these bottles in the street. And it was rough. I was so hungry that I'm still ashamed to admit today that I've stolen food from my classmates because I was just starving. They had lunch and I would just like pick some stuff. And it was just difficult. And you mentioned the malnutrition. Yeah, like we're, in Eastern Europe, getting tuberculosis is not very common, but my immune system was just so compromised from malnutrition. I was so skinny that I was 7 or 8 when I was, taken to hospital. But the funny thing is that, I loved being in the hospital because suddenly I was fed 3 times a day. I didn't have to worry about, being hungry. And then I didn't have to worry about all the horrible fights and just physical violence that I was experiencing at home from my father. And so I was sad to leave, and there were other kids I could play with. So it's just interesting how sometimes, same experience, right? For some children, it was their worst experience of their life being in the hospital for a whole week. And for me, it was one of the best experiences
I know
that
context,
I
right?
had.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything is a perspective.
Definitely. And it even sunk a little further too, in that there was your father lost his job and then it sunk to an even lower low, if at all
Yeah,
possible.
it did. So I think so. There was this crazy story. So, my family, when you look at the background, you'll just think it's like some sort of a movie script, but it's all real. My father is a twin brother, has a twin brother. So, the twin brother came to Georgia from Georgia to Russia to visit us. And then he, at some point, I didn't know it back then. Now, as an adult, I learned that he was a drug user. So he pretended to be my father because they're twins, went to my father's job and stole all the money that the business had. And of course, it was my father who got blamed because, it was assumed identity. So like that, and then that kind of spiraled that alcoholism dependency even further. When it got much, much worse when he lost his business, his job, and his identity, and he just kind of stopped working like for a while. And so it got so bad that if not for my grandmother back in Georgia, she sold her jewelry to be able to afford to buy us tickets on a train. It's a 3-day train ride to go from Moscow, Russia to Georgia, so that we would come back because we were about to be homeless. Like we didn't pay rent. We were constantly hiding because the landlord would come and start knocking, trying to get us to pay, right? So I just remember all that stress, like going to school, like making sure nobody's waiting in the staircase. So it's like almost like this crazy movie that I was living through, And I just remember always like looking at my family and I was like, I don't belong here. Like, how am I in this family? I just felt like this is craziness that I wanted to escape. And, back then my family was not at all religious. So to give you perspective, in Georgia, it's Orthodox Christianity. So majority of people, when asked, they say, yes, I'm a Christian. But in reality, they don't really understand who Jesus was, what he did, why, nothing. They just say, oh, yeah, yeah, we've been doing this for generations. So they go to church on like Easter and, there's certain rituals that they do, but don't understand why. And we were no exception, same thing. And so I didn't really know God. I didn't really, and more so, I think I was really angry with God. And I was thinking, like, if God exists and he's allowing for all these horrible things to happen to me as a child, then I don't want anything to do with this God. And so I just rejected the whole idea that there is one. But looking back, the first time that God spoke to me, I was actually 12 or 13 years old. And I didn't realize it back then that it was God speaking to me. I thought it was me. But now reflecting back, I was like, oh, yeah, that was totally the first time God spoke to me. And the way it went, my memories are pretty blurry. Our brain really protects us from trauma. So I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood, just from, I guess, protection purposes. But this particular memory is super clear. Like if I close my eyes, I feel like I'm still there. It's that vivid. And so it was fall, and I stepped outside on a break between the classes. And I just remember like suddenly, like the whole world just quieted. Like everything that was happening was kind of became background noise. And suddenly there was this phrase that like was very vivid in my mind. And it said, you are meant for more than this life. And it was really, really powerful. And it shook me to the core. And I attribute the whole change in my life to that moment because suddenly something was lit in my soul that I felt like I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out of my life circumstances at 12 or 13 years old. And now, granted, looking back, right, if I was speaking to myself at 12 or 13, I would have said, I am meant for more than this life, right? Like, why would you speak to yourself in the third person?
Sure.
But the message was very specific and it was very powerful. It was, you are meant for more than this life. And there was no really reason for me at that age to even have that message on my own. The reason behind it is I was told from very young age, because I was considered to be this beautiful girl, and my only future, even by my own grandparents, was predicted that I'm going to just get married at 16 and start having babies and be somebody's wife and mother. And that's the only future that I have. I'm not smart enough. I'm not capable enough to do anything further than that. And so if you're getting these messages all the time, it just doesn't make sense for me to suddenly get this inspirational message that really transformed me. And so I want to bring this story because even if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, even if you're somebody who even rejects God, he can still be so merciful and really transform you and work through you and give you motivation and hope and love, even if you reject him. And so I really cherish that memory now, just knowing like, wow, even back then when I hated God, he still loved me.
Were you propelled because at some point you get this fire, and I'm not sure if it's that fire or the fire to survive, literally, to then apply yourself to school and to
Mhm.
come out of this poverty and this. I mean, because you had trusted voices telling you that all you were good for was to get married
Right.
and have babies. Now,
Right.
we're not trying to negate that value of a woman or anything like that, but God was clearly leading you and was preparing you for a different direction.
I got that message. So suddenly I'm like, that's it. I'm going to get out of my life circumstances no matter what. And then imagine at 13, I'm thinking, okay, my family is really poor. We have no connections, no power. My family is just very dysfunctional. So, what can I do to get out of it? And there were two paths. One was try to find a rich husband. And that was majority of women chose that path in my circumstances and back then in my culture. Or I had to get it through education. And I was like, yeah, education is a safer path because around me back then, I have never seen a happy family. Everybody around me was in this unhappy marriages, unhappy, dysfunctional families. And so I just was like, I don't even know if I want to get married. It was just scary to me. So I thought, okay, education. And so then I start really applying myself. Like I just read all the books. Like my family was very, very strict. So I was not allowed to go anywhere outside school. So I was basically going to school, coming back in the afternoon, and I wasn't allowed to leave the house. And I wasn't allowed to watch TV. So the only thing and the only escape for me was books. But that allowed me to really dive into a lot of literature and get very educated very quickly through that work. And then there was this competition that I heard about, and I was like, what is this? But basically, at the end of that competition, if you got selected, you would be sent to the United States as an exchange student. And this was a program that was sponsored by the State Department. It still operates to this day. And so they bring this, and it's called Future Leaders Exchange. And so they want to bring this high potential teenagers to the US to educate them so that they can be sent back home and get like just more skills into their countries. And it's mostly between developing countries and the US. And even back then, so I'm 15 at this point. I knew that if I told my father, he would tell me, no, you cannot go, because he was just very controlling. So I hid the entire process from my family until I couldn't hide it anymore. So I was the finalist. So it was five of us, and basically out of five, they would select only two people. And at that point, you had to bring in your family to make sure they were interviewed as well. And I still am amazed that at 15, I had such street smarts about my father, and I knew the only way he would allow me to go if we manipulated the situation where it played to his ego. So before I went to my father, I went to my mother and my grandmother. I also knew that I had to have both of their support before we can go to him. And so I tell them like, this is it. If I win, I'm going to go for a year. And I said, we need to make sure the way we position this to my father is that, listen, everybody will be like, wow, your daughter went to the US. Like everybody will be looking up to you saying, what an amazing father and how you raised this wonderful daughter. And so that's how we positioned the whole thing.
Interesting to hear you coaching two grown women on how to,
Yeah,
persuade your father in agreement.
absolutely. So, I had to do what I had to do. And so that's how he got convinced and allowed me to go. And one thing I didn't mention that I will mention here, the entire time from age 8 till about, I would say 13 or 14, my father was also sexually abusing me. And so you can imagine he looked at me not only as his daughter, but there was this twisted mindset. And there was a reason why he wouldn't allow me to go anywhere. There was very control over my body as well. Like I wasn't allowed to pierce my ears. I wasn't allowed to shave my legs, like just different things that normally as a teenager you have to go through these processes right as you mature and go through puberty. And I had a unibrow. Like it was just terrible. If you see my pictures like when I was a teenager, it was not good. Not
You're
good.
making me laugh because you're absolutely gorgeous, and I'm looking at
Yeah,
you now with a
then I
unibrow.
don't I did not look anything what I looked like. Oh, and then at some point, oh my goodness, I'm laughing now. Like my parents gave me this haircut that I look like a boy. Like literally. I'm like, who gives a girl this kind of haircut? Like what?
My mother was famous for trying to cut your bangs, and she would try to even them out and cut them shorter and shorter and shorter till you had like
Mhm.
your bangs were laying up on the top of your hairline. So yeah, we've
I
all
think
been
there's
there, I
just a
guess.
rule that parents are not allowed to cut children's hair, period, right?
I agree.
So anyway, so fast forward, I get accepted and I come to the US. And so again, I think God really placed me in the right family. It was a Christian family. They were much older. They had grown kids. They were already almost retired. And this was the first time I've ever seen an example of a healthy family where they love each other, respect each other. A woman has a voice, she has rights, and there's no abuse going on. And it was just amazing. And then I also saw all the opportunities you get as a woman in the US. And then I knew I will do anything possible to come back. Like I will do. I just remember when had to leave after a year, I was sobbing the entire time. Can you imagine? Like, I did not want to go back to my family. Like, I just was heartbreaking because I didn't know if I ever will come back. Because back then, there was this rule that after the exchange year, I wasn't allowed to come back to the US for 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
So, and then, I'm still poor. It's not like I can just afford to come here. So I knew the only way for me to come again is through education. And the only education I can get is if I get a scholarship. So 2 years go by. And I think again that it was just like such a God moment. I was at this training that I was conducting in an American library. And during lunch break, most people were just, just playing around, talking. But I, for some reason, was just, I don't even know why. I was just guided to go to this one shelf. And then I found this big book. So apparently, the US publishes a list of all colleges and universities in the US and then sends out these books to all the American libraries worldwide. So I come across this book, and this entire hour, I'm just flipping through it and looking for colleges and universities that offer full scholarships to international students. The book was this thick, like thick, thick. I came up with three colleges that offered 100% tuition to international students. So I go back in the evening home and start researching. And then one particular college, it's called Berea College, and it's in Kentucky, the small liberal arts college. But if you get accepted, they pay for not just your scholarship, but for room and board, which it's also very expensive. They give you a job, they pay for your insurance. So everything is covered. And
Wow.
that was the only college I applied to. And I got accepted. And so that's how I came to the United States. And one interesting thing I want to also mention that happened in between in those 2 years. So I had a very traumatic first love experience. So when my father found out I had my first boyfriend at 18 or 19, he basically withdrew me from school and locked me in the house. And it was just my entire family would stop talking to me because basically you were not allowed to date unless your family approved. And the only person they allowed me to call was my host mother, who I stayed with when I was 16. And so I tell her everything that happened. Like I was just beaten. I was like isolated. It was just horrible, horrible. Like this was the lowest moment of my life where I just wanted to like even commit suicide. Like I even thought about like ending my own life. And she says, well, we were going to go to Africa on our mission trip, but it sounds like we might need to come to Georgia. And I was like, what? And so they do that. Instead of going to Africa, they come on a mission trip to live in Georgia so that I can move out of my parents' home. And so my family was in like a smaller town, and I was going to school in the capital, Tbilisi. And so I was able to live with them and continue going to school. And so it was very interesting because my host mother started this nonprofit in Georgia. And eventually, already after I left, that nonprofit was one of the moving forces of pushing the Georgian government to make domestic abuse illegal. Because while I was growing up, domestic abuse was not considered to be a crime. And so it was my host mom and the nonprofit that was really on the forefront of pushing that legislation and making it illegal. And so isn't that interesting? Just like everything how God arranged and interweaved and it's just incredible and it blows my mind.
I'm telling you, as you're talking, I see the doors opening. I see the situations God's connecting here and connecting there, and then bringing it back around, bringing them to Georgia,
Yeah.
starting a nonprofit that then destroys or lessens, the power over that people have over someone else with through domestic abuse.
Mhm.
So this is all definitely God moving. And I'm assuming you're really not making a connection yet, or how did your host family impress upon you? Because I know they're praying for you. I know she
Yeah.
comes to Georgia for you.
Yeah, I mean, they just never pushed me on anything faith-wise. I've gone to church with them when they went to church, but back then I just remember as a teenager, I just felt like it was such a chore to go, but
I
I
know.
went. They never really pushed me. They just showed me the love of Jesus through their actions. It was never really enforced. And then, so that was my first host family, right? And so it's interesting how God placed these people who are not blood related to me, but really have had just incredible impact and have done so much for me. So when I came to Berea College in Kentucky, so this is back in 2008, I get assigned to another host family. Now, this time I don't live with them, but they're still like, and we have dinners together. We've gone and, I went on a Thanksgiving trip with them and so on. This particular host family, my host father is a pastor, and my host mom works for International Mission Board. So
Okay. All
very
right.
devout Christian family. Again, they don't press me, but they, invite me to church and I go a couple times. They, try to have a conversation about Jesus and I'm not having it. But they're praying the entire time, right? They're like, we're going to pray for you. So they've been just really incredible and supportive and just amazing. And I go to study business because I said I am not gonna just starve ever. I'm going to make a lot of money. So how do you make money? Business degree. So I get my bachelor's degree in business. Then I get a full scholarship at University of Kentucky to get my MBA. So I go there. And so then I start my career in sales because sales is where if you're good, you can make a lot of money.
Very lucrative, yes.
Yeah, very, very lucrative. So, for 10 years, that was my career and I was so good at it and I made so much money and I was living my life, right? I was just like traveling and could afford anything, pretty much anything I wanted. So, and then I have this big dream. I want to have a condo in the middle of a big city with the high rises. Like that's my big immigrant, like I made a dream, right? And so that dream finally comes true in March of 2020. I close on my condo. And then I spent thousands of dollars renovating it because I need my condo to look exactly the way I want to, of course,
Of
right?
course.
So, I move into my beautifully renovated new condo. And I swear, it's been 30 days or so. I sit on my couch and I look like just in the distance on this beautiful skyscrapers And I say, well, now what? Because all that anticipation of, oh, I'm going to be happy. Once I achieve this, I'm going to be happy. Well, that doesn't come true because it's only happy for 30 days. And I was like, that's not sustainable. For me to work and work and work for the next big thing I want to buy, only for it to last 30 days. And then I'm again, now what? So I think that really kind of started spiraling me out, thinking like there has to be more to life than just this life that I'm living. Throughout this entire period when I'm in the US, I have to mention that I've done a lot of healing work. So I've done a lot of different types of therapies, and I'm working through my childhood trauma. In the middle of the thing, those 10 years, my mother finally divorces my father. So then she becomes like this emotional dependent on me. So then there's this unhealthy dynamic happening between me and my mom I'm working through. So all this stuff, but then I paused for a while. But in 2020, when that moment came, that is when my encounter with God happened. And so, again, the entire time I'm atheist, right? The story. And suddenly, October of 2020, I wake up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and I'm wide awake. And I don't know why. I've never prayed before, but that particular night, I was like, Lord, like I didn't say Lord, I said, God, if you exist, that's how I started the prayer. God, if you exist, why do I keep feeling this way? Like there has to be more to life. And suddenly I hear a voice, audible voice in my room that says, go to the store, prepare food, feed the hungry. And I'm like, did I dream this? I'm like pinching myself, thinking like, no, this is not real. Like, no. And so I forced myself to go to sleep, and I'm like, I'm going to deal with this in the morning. So I go to sleep, and then in the morning I wake up and I'm feeling like, no, something did happen last night. And so I call to work and say, guys, can come in today, need a personal day. No problem. Okay. So then I go to a store close to my house and I buy supplies. So I buy like stuff for sandwiches, I buy fruit and waters. And so I stand in my kitchen, I'm preparing the sandwiches and I'm making this lunches. So I make 24 bags of lunches. I pack them all out in this big bag, get in my car, and then I was like, well, I've seen a lot of homeless people in downtown area of Atlanta where I live now. So okay, let me go there. So again, by myself, didn't really think through anything like safety, maybe not smart to go on your own. No, just went. I'm like, I am going to fulfill what I was told in the middle of the night by this voice. So, doing this for about an hour, every time I would see a homeless person in the street, stop, offer them lunch. So after about an hour, I come across a larger group, like maybe 10 to 12 people. So I park my car and I count them. And then I count how many bags of lunches I have left and have exact number of lunches left. And I'm
Of
like,
course.
of course, I'm like, really weird, but okay. So I just get the whole big bag and I walk over there and I say, hey guys, I just prepared some lunches if you want some. They're like, yes. So give the lunches away. So I think, okay, I'm done for the day. So I was about to get in my car. And suddenly one of the ladies calls me and she says, hey, honey, come over here. So I walk over there and she says, looks at me and with this smile, she says, I have a gift for you. And I was like, okay, like a little, shocked, like, wow, I should be giving you more than lunch and you're giving me a gift. So she has all of her belongings in this one big brown bag. And so she's just looking and looking and looking for this thing she wants to give me. So finally she pulls it out and she hands it to me with this big smile. So I look at it and it's this little bird made out of clay and it's a little sparrow. And on its chest, there was written, now in God's hands. And I had this moment of like, just felt like lightning struck my heart and I
Right.
the tears. And I'm embarrassed. Like this woman probably, I'm like, suddenly she hands me a gift and suddenly, I just start sobbing. So I get in the car but the only thing that I keep thinking in that moment is like, God is real. God is real. God is real. He's talking to me. So I just drive home and I order my first Bible from Amazon. So the next day, during COVID, they were delivering like crazy fast. And so I literally got the Bible the next day. So I start reading it like cover to cover, right? Like from beginning all the way. And a lot of it does not make sense. And I'm like, okay, I think I need help. So then I literally Google best churches in Atlanta and just pick one based on reviews and start going to church like it's, a restaurant that you're picking. So started going to church. And then, after about a year, I really understood what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And then guess what? I drove to Kentucky, and my host father, who's a pastor, was the one who baptized me in his church after 10 years of prayers.
10 years of prayers. They never return void. That's
Yes.
awesome. We
Yeah.
can hang on to that for our children, for our loved ones, for those people that God entrusts to us to pray for. We've
Mhm.
hit all these beautiful transformational moments, and how glorious are they? But let me ask you some questions about the nitty gritty of getting there. Because as
Mhm.
a child, you're imprinted by your family of origin, you're imprinted by the community you're in. And so when I think about a 7 or 8 year old who's picking up bottles on the street, what impact does that have on you mentally? Or maybe even what sort of survival skills did you find yourself having to live with later because you were acclimating yourself to that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that happened. So one thing in regards to experiencing hunger. One thing that I had to break is as an adult, I had to always have completely full fridge and completely full cupboards with food in order for me to feel secure, to feel like I'm okay and nothing bad is going to happen. I like forget intermittent fasting before, like, no, I cannot be hungry, right? I have to eat when I'm hungry, kind of thing. So it's very psychological. But most of everything that was affected is my really self-worth. I think a lot of people, before I came off as a very confident person, but I think I truly didn't understand how God views me. And it only really became apparent when I became a Christian is that how valuable I am and how much loved I am by God, and that He forgives, mistakes that I have made. Because trauma causes, especially when you are a survivor of child sexual abuse, it affects your relationships with men. I made a lot of mistakes and poor choices in men when I was younger. And that was because I thought I was not worthy of love. I thought that, I was here to fulfill men's desires and needs, that really I can only be loved if I do something for people, not because of who I am. And so, really, it's in the past 4 years when I became a Christian that healing came. No other therapy has been able to provide me with that additional healing that I needed to know what my self worth is and how God views me.
And that's through reading scripture, praying, worshiping.
All of the above. One of the things that I do that some Christians maybe have not experienced, I have a practice of going on silent retreats. So in the past, I started about 2 years ago, and in the past 2 years, I've gone 7 times. And so that has been a very transformative experience for me in my journey with the Lord. What I'm doing now, it all came out of that time alone with God. And, we have many examples. People don't realize that when you say silent retreat, it's actually what Jesus did in many different times in the Bible when when John the Baptist died and Jesus wanted to go alone and pray. That's the practice of silent retreat where nobody's around you and you're just with the Lord, or he goes to the mountain to pray by himself. Jesus gave us that example in the Bible. And so I follow that example. I've done anything from as short as 2.5 days to as long as 5 days of no speaking, no connection to the world. So no cell phones, nothing. And there's been such really supernatural encounters that I've had the first 2 times. During my first retreat, I actually wrote my book in 2 days. So I wrote Finding Courage to Change basically talking about my childhood and the healing journey and my encounter with God. And it felt like really a download. And the title came from the vision, the cover of the book came from the vision. So all of it really came in that retreat, and that was really just incredible. And then at the end of my sabbatical that I took after I quit my corporate career, I went on another silent retreat seeking really what's my purpose, because I really felt like God has been calling me for something bigger and I didn't know what it was. And everything that I do now really came from that vision. So God really showed me a vision, like a business plan almost, of what he wanted me to work on. And it's really solving homelessness in our country through faith and community. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years. But it would not have happened if I didn't dedicate that time of being alone and really seeking God's guidance and purpose. And one thing I want to say is that after the first two, this kind of very supernatural, powerful encounters, I have not gotten that encounter again. And I'll tell you why. The third time I went, if you or somebody else has experienced something that powerful from God, you start craving it, because it's amazing, amazing feeling knowing God this close, right? And so I went for that reason, because I was craving that. Wow, what else is God gonna do? It's almost like God is this magician and I'm expecting him to do another trick, right? And I just remember God was quiet the entire time. And I feel like it was like fourth or maybe even fifth day. And I was in this prayer garden and I was just praying. And I was like, Lord, like, what is it that you want me to hear? And suddenly there was this quiet voice that comes and says, no more signs will be given to you. Now your faith is strong enough where you need to seek my voice in quiet places. And I was like, oh, and then I felt such shame. I was like, I know, Lord, I've been coming because I wanted to see your power again. And it's been like this. So I have not had any kind of additional supernatural encounters with God since then. And he does come as a quiet voice when I seek him. So, he's a really, really good teacher, but I think he knew that I needed those signs to really believe that he's real and to bring me into, his flock. And now that he said, your faith is now strong enough. That's it, my daughter. No more signs. Now you just need to study and seek my voice in quiet places.
It's been my experience after grieving my husband and being in that very dark valley that, and I had no choice but to be still. But God did some of his most powerful work in that be still season of my life, because I couldn't lift a finger, a hand. I didn't have enough money. I couldn't change my circumstances, whatever. But all I had was the Lord, but certainly he was enough. So that
Yeah.
be still practice. And how many times does the word say that God withdrew, to be by
Mhm.
himself? And so I value that quiet time as well.
Mhm.
But I see what you're saying too. If we come seeking the miracle and not the miracle maker,
Yeah.
and look how easy that was to kind of shift into that, and you don't really realize it. But
Yeah.
God does correct it. He's corrected me many
Yeah.
times on things where
Absolutely.
I lost my bearings, if you will. I was not looking at the giver, but the what was being given kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
As I've been listening to you, it kind of solidifies this takeaway from hearing my guests repeat this many times, and that is what is born out of their trauma. I've had the privilege to hear so many examples of how God transforms our traumas in life, and I've come to believe that if someone has to discover their has if someone has not yet discovered their calling or their purpose in life, the first thing I've been telling him is look in the place where you feel the least gifted and the least qualified. Because if Satan got a whiff of of what God was doing in your life and the gifting that he was going to give you, you better believe he was going to destroy it before you ever realized that it was anything of value. We're getting ready to talk about where you're at now in life and this redemption story that you have and how now you're impacting other people's lives. So my thing is look at your traumas,
Mm-hmm.
get healed, walk
Yeah.
in that. Other people need you. Other people need your knowledge, your insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you even more. Every person, we say it like, oh yeah, every life matters, but then our society often treats the homeless like they're on the bottom of their societal pyramid. But look at my story. I have been saved, and got to know God through a homeless woman that gave me that bird. And so she transformed my life. God used her to transform my life. And look at all the trickle effect that it's been having. God brought it full circle where he saved me through a homeless woman, and my purpose is to help the homeless. Right. So he crafted this beautiful story, right? I think in the US, we really love this beautiful stories, right? It's just like this Hollywood ending. God just created one right there where he says, listen, who you consider to be on the bottom can really save and transform somebody's life. So every life does matter. And even the homeless can transform and save lives.
And you're proof of that because you have a ministry now. You're doing global ministry now. And I call it a ministry. I don't know that I've seen that word used in your title or anything like that, but I call it a ministry. Tell us a little bit about this global outreach where you are transforming people.
Absolutely. So, it's not about that we don't have enough resources. I think our world is abundant and our God is abundant, but sometimes distribution of those resources is not really equally divided. But, I mentioned that God gave me that vision back in December of 2022. And it was this vision of basically transforming how our homelessness looks in this country. And with the headers of saying like this program, eradicates homelessness in the US. And I remember I fell down on my knees and I thought, oh Lord, I started crying. I said, who am I to fulfill this? I have no power, no contacts, I have no money. Like, how am I supposed to do this? And but then I calmed down and I talked with some advisors and my host father, who's a pastor, and he says, well, it is from God and he showed it as a done deal. So you just need to figure it out. What's the next step? And so I started looking at it. What if this vision was a business plan and it's a 5-year business plan? What would be the step one? And I said, I needed to build my Christian contacts because I was atheist most of the time. I didn't have Christian friends. So then I started researching Christian meetups, Christian, networking in Atlanta. And I really couldn't find anything that met consistently. And so I said, I'm going to start my own. So in January of 2023, I started Christian Professionals of Atlanta. I already purchased Christian Professionals of America because God showed me that this is going to be in the US. So I was like, okay, down the road, we're going to rebrand. But it was interesting. So in the first year, we really organized as a networking organization that focuses on philanthropy. So I started building my contacts with homeless shelters, with other nonprofit leaders, bringing in this community of business people who are Christian. So really build this network around me so that by the time in the next year, I was getting ready to rebrand and I was going to get ready to rebrand to say Christian Professionals of America. But the first request for a chapter came from Brazil. And then I slowed down and I said, okay, Lord, so I guess you want this worldwide, not just in the US. So we rebranded. Instead of America, we are now Christian Professionals Network Worldwide because the vision is to go worldwide and do a global mission. So, and then I was getting ready to really grow the networking and start opening new chapters. But before I do any major decisions, I go on silent retreats. So, no different, go on a silent retreat. And God is telling me, now is not the time for expansion. Now is the time for foundation. I said, oh Lord, you want me to what? Okay. So I come back and I start the foundation. Literally within 30 days, we get our IRS nonprofit status approval in like 2 weeks. That's unheard of. Like typically it's like
Nonprofit?
3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Had our first fundraiser done and everything. And then it made sense why, because right before a fundraiser, Supreme Court passes this legislation making homelessness punishable by crime, by law, punishable by law. And so I said, okay, Lord, I understand now. You don't want your people to be put in jail for what? Because they cannot afford to have a house. And so we decided that this is really important for us to start building. So this is part of the research that we've done. Number one reason why people become homeless in the US is what's called relational poverty. So what that means is lack of community, lack of strong bonds like family, friends, faith community. And so when something unexpected happens to 35 million of Americans who currently live on poverty line,
Wow.
loss of job, car breaks down, health issue, if they don't have community who can help them pay their unexpected bill, chances are they're going to be homeless, and it's mostly homeless families. So another interesting thing that I learned, at least in Georgia, what we see in the streets is what's called chronically homeless. And it's only 11% of the overall homelessness issue. Majority of homelessness in our country is unseen. We don't even know that there are so many people living in shelters, in cars, in long hotel stays. And then I started looking at how our shelters operate. And most shelters are here to fulfill their physical needs, and that's important. But what about their spiritual and their community needs? And so then it completely made sense why God showed me this business plan, because that's where we come in. So I recruit volunteers to become mentors, to pair with the homeless families so that they can have a contact who is there to pray for them, to spend time with them, to guide them, to just really let them know that there's somebody who cares.
Right.
And so, we started last year with this everything recruitment. Our first cohort just launched this month, and we're already recruiting for a spring cohort, and we're basically going to be expanding to a second homeless shelter here shortly. So really the vision is to start not just building this community for people to network, but how can we affect our community as a whole with those that are less fortunate. So we've proven this concept here in Atlanta, and so the next step is to open chapters and for the foundation to follow in different markets, first in the US and then internationally, because it's needed in many other parts of the world. And we know when Jesus becomes your foundation, things change. You look at yourself differently. You look at your self-worth, how you look at work ethic is different. And so this might be the first time somebody just like me, I never was with Christians before. And then I was paired with that host family, and that transformed my life. This could be that transformative experience for somebody else. And so we're casting that vision that hopefully God will open doors, and then we'll continue to grow until there is no more homelessness in our country.
Amen. Your story continues to reveal this reverberation of what God did in your life personally, giving you educational opportunities, and things to reach for. And then a host family. It sounds like you've paired up these other families with hosts families, or even someone who just comes alongside of them in that host fashion, and then feeding and caring for and transforming. This is just a beautiful process. Were you intimidated at the very least when God gives you a plan like that?
Absolutely. My first thought was like, who am I to do this? And I was sobbing on my knees. I was so overwhelmed. I was very overwhelmed by this whole vision. And I still am. Sometimes I'm like, wow, this is really, really an important mission. And I'm just a human. And so sometimes, I just pray like, Lord, don't allow my ego to run wild. Don't, you have to be humble in this situation, because I look at myself like I am shepherding this organization and the people I'm leading. So I have to make sure I behave in the way that, is showcasing Jesus and his love. And I know I always fall short. We are not perfect, but I try my best, right? But I don't want to be Christian hypocrite, right? That says one thing, but their behavior is a completely different way. So it's a constant struggle that, and you need God to make sure that he guides you, that he, perfects you as much as you can throughout this process, and so that we can be sanctified as much as we can in our lifetime.
You know, the Lord is always repairing and healing these places where we get tripped up at. Maybe we get, I don't necessarily like this word, but triggered over something, because it is a way for me to say, oh, do I still need healing in that area, Lord? And I thought we were past that, but clearly I have a reaction that is not in line with healing. So I need to have a conversation with you and Holy Spirit. That's a process in any of our lives. But is there anything that God did for you specifically with identity in order for you to have the courage to step into this role? Because it sounds like it had been stripped away in every way.
Mhm. Well, and that goes back to just seeing myself through eyes of God, how much he loves me, how important I am to him. I remember in one prayer session at one of my silent retreats, my process is I do a lot of Bible reading sometimes. So I do just praising Lord, just repeating, maybe hallelujah, or praise the Lord, just one phrase that over and over and over and over. That allows me to really clear my mind so that then I can just sit and meditate and allow God to speak to me. And I remember I had this one experience where suddenly I really felt God's presence, and it was this darkness all around me, but it wasn't scary. And I felt like I was this little piece of tiny, tiny, tiny piece of this magnificent universe that God has prepared. And I felt so small. But at the same time, in the same moment, God showed me, even though I'm so small, how much he respects me, values me, loves me, and how important I am to him. And that was just such a wow feeling, because in the same moment, I realized I'm such a small speck on the continuum of time and space and everything that God created. I am nothing, but yet he finds me so important. And that was a very transformative experience. And I hope and I pray that people can understand, like, this is how God views us, even
Yeah.
though we're so small.
There have been several times when I'm flying into somewhere late at night and you look out the window and you look at all, like LA, all the lights everywhere. And I'm like, Lord, if each one of these lights represented a person, you would still see me. You would still
Mhm.
see each one as an individual.
That's
And that
right.
always has struck me as a visual that, wow,
Yeah,
he cares about every single light, every single
absolutely.
person.
And I truly think that, every single one of us has a calling and a purpose that God gives us, but he also gives us freedom of choice and free will. And many of us refuse to follow him because it's not the easiest path sometimes to follow him. But I just know that even though has not been the easiest path, I have sacrificed a lot for this mission. That beautiful condo, well, I had to sell it in order to support my mission. Guess what? I sold my fancy car and I don't have a car right now because I chose to cut down my expenses so I can do this mission.
Mm.
And I gave everything back to God because it's his anyway. But it's sacrifices. But I tell you, I have never felt so fulfilled, and I have never felt so joyful and happy and close to God as when I do this work. Even though I can right now go back to corporate sales and make a lot more money, my life would be a lot simpler, but it won't be as joyful because now I know I'm helping transform lives, and I'm
Mm.
helping people, and I'm trying to leave this world a little bit better than before I came into it.
I just ran across a scripture last night and I only took portion of it. So now that I'm going to share it, I wish I had expounded it a little bit because it's in Matthew chapter 23. And I think this verse is 5, but it was talking about how can we make a difference, in with our traumas and other people. And it says, and I forget which version this is because it's not like KJV or NIV, but it says, don't increase burdens, make them lighter for people. Some of you wonder what you are supposed to do with your life. Here is a vocation that will bring you more satisfaction than if you became a millionaire 10 times over. Develop the extraordinary skill of detecting the burdens of others and devote yourself daily to making them lighter. And that, to me, is a perfect example of what you live for and what you live out. So
Yeah.
I am excited to share this encouraging message with everyone. Let me close with two questions.
Okay.
And the first one is, have I not asked you about something that you want to talk about? Anything that you want to share that I have failed to ask you about or don't know about?
I just pray that each listener has courage to say this prayer. Say the prayer of, God, show me what's my purpose. Show me what's the impact I'm supposed to leave on this planet. And I know that if you're ready, that in one way or another, you'll start receiving signs or opening doors or doors closed where God will start leading you, because I truly encourage you to go after that purpose that God has put on you.
I feel like God is always trying to engage us, creating opportunities and drawing and calling. And it's when we take the time to engage Him that things start to happen and come alive and action happens. So let me close with this final question. If our listeners only remember one thing about our whole conversation, what is their one takeaway?
I think the main takeaway is that no matter how difficult your circumstances are now, that too shall pass.
Mhm.
And God can get you through anything. Sometimes when you feel like it's darkness all around and there's no hope, just know that God is our hope and He will get you through it, because I've gone through hell, honestly. My life has been incredibly, incredibly challenging, and I've experienced a lot of hurt and a lot of pain from people who were supposed to love me the most and protect me. I've never experienced that, but yet God showed me what it means like to be loved by a loving father, what it means like to be surrounded by like-minded people who become my new family. And it's true, when you become a Christian, you get reborn. And that's exactly how I feel. And so I hope that this message uplifts you and encourages you to pray. Even if you've been praying for a long time, listen, my host family was praying for me for 10 years, but yet that prayer gets answered exactly at the right time, because God knows when and how and why and in what way He's going to answer it. So just don't lose hope. God is everything for us.
That is precious. I know that I've been sharing with my listeners that it's easy to spend time with God and recline in God. It is very difficult to bend our will to what He's trying to do in our life. But the exchange, when we submit and our things to Him, the exchange is so beautiful. It's just
Absolutely.
incredibly beautiful. It's a reward, like you're saying, that is beyond what we could have thought to ask for. Anya, you've been very gracious with your time and with your information, and I'm feeling extremely encouraged. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time and for sharing this experience with my guest. I hope you have found encouragement for today and a deeper revelation of God's heart in the midst of pain and suffering. We'd love to have you as a subscriber to Finding God in Our Pain so that you can be connected with all my guests as they share their personal experiences and professional knowledge about pain and suffering. And because this podcast is a division of the website A Life of Thrive, for more information and the various ways you can connect with us, please visit the website alifeofthrive.com. I look forward to sharing more transparent stories from the hearts of women who intimately know what it means to have their world flipped upside down, their authentic struggle to make sense of it, and what recovery and healing looks like. Till then, sweet woman, remember you are not alone and that God speaks the most beautiful things in the dark.